10 years after the disappearance of 21-year-old intern Marissa Cole, the truth surfaced. Not in a forest, not in a confession, but in a dusty USB drive hidden at the back of a jewelry box. A box that belonged to Claire Harrow, wife of Evan Harrow, the man everyone trusted. The discovery would unravel a decade of silence, expose a carefully constructed lie, and reveal that some secrets don't just haunt the guilty. They consume them from the inside out, one sleepless night at a time, until there's nothing left but the hollow shell of who they pretended to be. This is the story of how a single USB drive destroyed a marriage, exposed a murder, and proved that guilt has a way of finding you. Even when you think you've buried it forever. Even when you've convinced yourself that time has erased what you did. Evan Harrow thought he was safe. He was wrong. And by the time he realized someone had been watching all along, it was already too late. The question isn't whether he would get caught. The question is, who made sure he did? Bristol County, Ohio. Population 12,000. The kind of place where everyone knows your name, where neighbors wave from porches, where the bank closes at 4 and Friday night football games draw the whole town. A place where nothing bad is supposed to happen. In 2014, Evan Harrow was 42 years old and living the American dream. Vice president at Bristol County Bank, respected by colleagues, admired by clients. He had a house on Maple Street with a wraparound porch and a basketball hoop in the driveway. 2 kids, a wife who believed in him completely. Claire Harrow taught 2nd grade at the local elementary school. She organized church bake sales, hosted neighborhood barbecues, and never missed a parent-teacher conference. She thought she knew her husband. She thought she knew everything that mattered. She was wrong about both. Evan was the kind of man who remembered birthdays, who helped elderly customers understand their mortgage options, who coached Little League on weekends. His handshake was firm. His smile was genuine, or at least, it looked that way. People trusted him because he seemed trustworthy. That's how it works in small towns. But behind every perfect life is a door nobody's supposed to open. Behind Evan's carefully maintained image was a secret he swore to take to the grave, and for 10 years, he almost succeeded. Marissa Cole arrived at Bristol County Bank in January 2014 as part of a college internship program. She was bright, ambitious, hard-working. She wanted to make something of herself. She wanted to prove she belonged in a world that hadn't always been kind to her. She was studying finance at Ohio State University. She was the first person in her family to attend college. Her mother worked 2 jobs to help pay tuition. Her older brother Daniel had dropped out of school years earlier to support the family after their father left. Marissa felt the weight of their sacrifices every single day. Evan noticed her immediately, not because of anything inappropriate, at least not at first. He noticed her because she asked smart questions, because she stayed late to finish reports, because she reminded him of who he used to be before mortgages and car payments and the crushing weight of middle age. He became her mentor. He invited her to sit in on client meetings, taught her how to read financial statements, gave her advice about navigating corporate politics. Everyone at the bank thought it was admirable. Claire thought it was sweet. Marissa's mother thought it was a blessing. Nobody saw what was coming. Or maybe they did, and they just didn't want to believe it. Because in a town like Bristol County, you want to believe that people are who they say they are. You want to believe that trust means something. Before we continue this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. because this story is about to take a turn that nobody saw coming. March 15th, 2014, a Saturday night. Marissa stayed late at the bank to finish an audit report that was due Monday morning. She texted her roommate at 8:30 p.m. to say she'd be home by 10. She never made it home. Security footage shows her leaving through the side entrance at 9:47 p.m. She's carrying her backpack and a stack of folders. She looks tired, but not afraid. She walks toward her car in the back lot, keys already in her hand. The camera loses her in the shadows. 3 minutes later, Evan's silver Honda Accord exits the same parking lot. He's alone in the vehicle. His headlights sweep across the empty lot before turning onto Main Street. This footage wouldn't surface until detectives started asking questions. And by then, Marissa had been missing for 6 days. Her roommate called the police Sunday afternoon when Marissa didn't come home and didn't answer her phone. Officers went to the bank first, interviewed staff, checked security footage. Evan told them he'd left around 8 p.m., that Marissa was still working when he departed. He seemed concerned, cooperative, genuinely worried. But the footage told a different story. And once detectives started pulling phone records and tracking movements, small inconsistencies began to appear. Nothing definitive. Nothing that proved anything. Just little cracks in the narrative that made them wonder. Marissa's car was found 2 days later in a grocery store parking lot 7 miles from the bank. Keys in the ignition. Engine cold. Her backpack was still in the passenger seat, laptop inside, wallet untouched. But the folders she'd been carrying were gone. One detail caught the attention of investigators. Marissa had been working on a financial audit for the bank, reviewing account discrepancies flagged by the regional office. She'd mentioned to a coworker that she'd found something unusual, something that didn't add up. She planned to finish the report over the weekend and present her findings Monday morning. That report never made it to Monday, and the flash drive containing her work files vanished along with her. Detectives asked Evan about it during his initial interview. He said he didn't know anything about missing files, that interns didn't typically handle sensitive audits, that maybe she'd taken the drive home. But Marissa's roommate was certain. Marissa never brought work files home. She was paranoid about losing them. She kept everything at the office backed up on the bank's secure server. So where was the flash drive? And why did Evan seem so unconcerned about its disappearance? The search for Marissa Cole consumed Bristol County for weeks. Volunteers combed forests and fields, checked abandoned buildings, dragged sections of the river. Her face appeared on news broadcasts across Ohio. Her mother made tearful appeals for information. Daniel, her older brother, printed flyers and drove to neighboring towns, refusing to believe she was gone. Evan participated in the search efforts. He was photographed handing out water bottles to volunteers, talking to reporters about what a talented intern Marissa had been, how the bank was offering a reward for information. He looked exhausted, deeply affected. Claire stood beside him during press conferences, her hand on his shoulder, never doubting him for a second. But at home, things were changing. Claire noticed small shifts in her husband's behavior. He stopped sleeping through the night, would wake at 2 or 3 a.m. and disappear downstairs. She'd find him sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. When she asked if he was okay, he'd say he was just stressed about work, about the investigation, about everything. He started drinking more, not enough to be obvious, but enough that she noticed. A glass of whiskey before bed became 2 glasses, then 3. He'd snap at the kids over minor things, apologize immediately, then retreat to his study. He stopped coaching Little League, stopped going to church, stopped being the man she'd married. One night in April, Claire woke to find Evan's side of the bed empty. She went downstairs and saw his car pulling into the driveway at 4 a.m. When she asked where he'd been, he said he couldn't sleep, went for a drive to clear his head. His shoes were muddy. His hands were shaking. She wanted to push harder, to demand answers. But part of her was afraid of what she might discover. So she told herself it was grief, stress, the trauma of losing a young colleague. She told herself it would pass. She told herself everything would be okay. She was lying to herself. And somewhere deep down, she knew it. Detective Marcus Harris had been with the Bristol County Sheriff's Department for 19 years. He'd worked maybe 3 homicides in his entire career, all of them straightforward domestic cases that resolved quickly. Missing persons cases were rare, mysterious disappearances even rarer. He knew this case was different from the start. The security footage bothered him. The timing was too convenient. Evan leaving 3 minutes after Marissa, on a night when almost nobody else was around. The missing files bothered him too. And Evan's phone records showed something strange. His phone pinged a cell tower 15 miles outside town at 11 p.m. that night. Nowhere near his house. Nowhere he had any reason to be. When Harris asked about it, Evan's answer came too quickly. He said he'd driven around after leaving the bank, needed to clear his head, had pulled over on a rural road to make some calls. But his phone log showed no outgoing calls during that time, just incoming calls from his wife, which he didn't answer until midnight. Harris couldn't prove anything, couldn't get a warrant, couldn't justify bringing Evan in for formal questioning based on circumstantial inconsistencies. But he kept the case file open, kept reviewing the evidence, kept waiting for something to break. He told his partner that Evan Harrow knew more than he was saying. He just couldn't prove it yet. Months passed. Spring became summer. The search efforts slowed, then stopped. Marissa's mother held a memorial service without a body. Daniel refused to attend, insisted his sister was still alive, that someone was hiding the truth. He started his own investigation, showing up at the bank unannounced, following Evan's movements, making accusations that got him escorted off the property by security. The case went cold, not officially, but practically. There were no new leads, no witnesses coming forward, no evidence that hadn't already been examined. Detective Harris kept Marissa's photo on his desk as a reminder, but as the 1-year anniversary approached, he knew the chances of solving it were fading. Then, in November 2014, 7 months after Marissa vanished, something happened that changed everything. Evan received an envelope at his office. No return address, no postage. Hand-delivered, slipped under his door before the bank opened. Inside was a newspaper clipping about Marissa's disappearance and a single sentence typed on plain white paper. "I know what you did." Evan's hands trembled as he read it. He locked his office door, shredded the contents, threw the envelope away in a dumpster behind the building. He told himself it was a prank, someone trying to get under his skin. But that night, he barely slept. And 2 weeks later, another envelope arrived. This one contained a photograph. It was a forest, just trees and darkness. But in the center of the image, someone had drawn a circle in red marker around a patch of disturbed earth. On the back, another typed message. "You didn't bury it deep enough." Evan burned that one in his fireplace at 2 a.m. while Claire slept upstairs. He stood watching the flames consume the paper, his reflection ghostly in the darkened window. He looked like a man who'd seen something he couldn't unsee, who carried a weight that was crushing him from the inside. The envelopes kept coming, never predictable. Sometimes weeks apart. Sometimes 2 in the same month. Each one contained another piece of psychological torture. A map with a location circled. A photo of Evan's house taken from across the street. A white USB icon drawn in permanent marker on a torn piece of cardboard. Evan started seeing cars that seemed to follow him. Started getting phone calls with nobody on the other end. Started feeling eyes on him everywhere he went. He became paranoid, erratic. He installed security cameras around his house, changed his routine constantly, started carrying a gun in his glove compartment, which was completely out of character for a man who'd never owned a weapon before. Claire confronted him in December, demanded to know what was happening, why he was acting this way, whether he was in some kind of trouble. He told her it was nothing, just stress from work, just the lingering trauma of Marissa's disappearance. But she didn't believe him anymore. The lie was too obvious, the fear in his eyes too real. She started going through his things when he wasn't home, not because she wanted to, because she needed to understand what was destroying her husband, what was tearing their family apart. She found nothing at first, just normal documents, normal receipts, normal evidence of a normal life. But she kept looking, kept searching, kept hoping she was wrong about what she suspected. Years passed. 2015 became 2016. The envelopes continued, sporadic but relentless. Evan's paranoia deepened. His drinking worsened. His marriage deteriorated. But somehow, impossibly, no one else knew. To the outside world, Evan Harrow remained the respectable bank executive, the family man, the pillar of the community. Detective Harris never stopped thinking about Marissa Cole. Every few months, he'd pull the file, review the evidence, look for something he'd missed. In 2017, he received an anonymous tip through the department's online portal. 4 words. Ask him about the woods. No name, no contact information. Sent from a library computer in Columbus, 90 miles away. Harris tried to trace it, got nowhere. But the message gnawed at him. The woods. What woods? Ohio had thousands of acres of forest. Without more specifics, the tip was useless, but it confirmed what Harris had always suspected. Someone knew what happened. Someone had information they weren't sharing. He brought Evan in for a follow-up interview. Casual, voluntary, just touching base on an old case. Evan agreed immediately, seemed almost eager to cooperate. But during the conversation, when Harris mentioned the woods, Evan's pupils dilated. Just for a second, just enough to notice if you were watching carefully. Harris asked if Evan ever went hiking, camping, spent time in the forests around Bristol County. Evan said no. He wasn't really an outdoors person. But his phone records told a different story. Multiple trips to areas near state forests over the past 3 years. Late-night trips. Trips that lasted hours. Trips with no explanation. When Harris pointed this out, Evan said he went there to think, to be alone, to escape the pressure of work and family. It wasn't illegal, wasn't even unusual, and Harris had to admit, he was right. Driving to the woods at midnight was strange, but it wasn't evidence of anything. He let Evan go, but he flagged his file, made a note to keep monitoring. In 2018, another anonymous message arrived at the sheriff's department. This one was different, more specific. It included GPS coordinates and a date. March 15th, 2014. The night Marissa disappeared. Harris entered the coordinates into Google Maps. They pointed to a section of Hocking Hills State Forest, 43 miles from Bristol County. He assembled a small team, didn't tell anyone outside the department what they were looking for. They hiked into the forest on a cold April morning, followed the coordinates to a clearing surrounded by pine trees. The ground looked undisturbed at first, but when they used ground-penetrating radar, they found something. An anomaly. A depression in the soil that suggested the earth had been disturbed and then settled over time. They started digging. 3 feet down, they found it. A shallow grave, and inside, the skeletal remains of Marissa Cole, still wearing the necklace her mother had given her for her 21st birthday. The necklace that had been described in every missing persons report, every news article, every desperate plea for information. The coroner confirmed cause of death, blunt force trauma to the skull. She'd been struck with something heavy, something that fractured her skull in 2 places. Death would have been relatively quick. She'd been buried face down, wrapped in a tarp that had mostly decomposed. No other clothing, no other evidence visible to the naked eye. But forensic analysis revealed more. Trace fibers from a car interior, Honda Accord, silver, matching Evan Harrow's vehicle, and soil samples from his tires, taken during a routine traffic stop 2 years earlier, matched the soil composition at the burial site. The net was closing. But Harris needed more. He needed absolute certainty, because he knew what a defense attorney would say. Circumstantial, coincidental, not enough for conviction. He needed something concrete, something that put Evan at that site on that specific night. He needed a confession or evidence so damning that no jury could ignore it. He needed the truth. Evan knew they'd found her. Even before the police came to his office, even before the news broke, he knew. He'd felt it the moment he woke that morning, a sick certainty settling in his chest. It was over. After 4 years of envelopes and paranoia and sleepless nights, after 4 years of waiting for this exact moment, it had finally arrived. Detective Harris arrested him at the bank on a Tuesday afternoon, charged him with murder, read him his rights while his colleagues watched through the glass walls of his office. Evan didn't resist, didn't protest, didn't say a word except to request a lawyer. His face was blank, almost relieved, like a man who'd been holding his breath for years and finally allowed himself to exhale. Claire heard about the arrest from a neighbor who saw it on the news. She sat in her car in the school parking lot, unable to move, unable to process what she was hearing. Her husband, the father of her children, arrested for murdering a young woman, the intern he'd mentored, the girl whose disappearance had devastated their community. She drove home in a daze. The house felt different, smaller, tainted. She walked through each room, looking at photos on the walls, at the life they'd built together, at evidence of a marriage that had been a lie. How had she not known? How had she convinced herself that everything was fine when it so obviously wasn't? That's when she started searching in earnest, not carefully, not methodically, but desperately. Tearing through closets, emptying drawers, pulling up floorboards. She needed to understand, needed to know who she'd been married to for 17 years. Needed to find something that made sense of the nightmare her life had become. She found the USB drive 3 days later. It was in her jewelry box, tucked behind a velvet pouch containing her grandmother's pearls. She almost missed it. But something made her look twice, made her pull out the small black device and stare at it like it was a living thing. Why was it here? She'd never seen it before. Evan didn't store files in her jewelry box. Her hands were shaking as she carried it to the computer in the study. She inserted it into the USB port, held her breath. waited for the files to load. When they did, when she saw the folder names and file types, she felt her stomach drop. This was it. This was the truth she'd been afraid to find. Audio files, photo files, document files. Dozens of them. She clicked on the first audio file, heard Evan's voice, slurred and broken, recorded at some unknown date. I didn't mean to kill her. I swear to God, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. She was going to destroy everything. My career, my family, my life. What was I supposed to do? Claire sat frozen, listening to her husband confess to murder, listening to him describe the struggle in his car, the moment Marissa's head struck the dashboard, the awful silence that followed, listening to him describe wrapping her body in a tarp from his trunk, driving to the forest, digging a grave with a shovel he'd purchased at a hardware store the week before. Purchased before she died. Like he'd been planning it. The photos were worse. Images of the burial site. Images taken on his phone, never deleted, transferred to this drive for safekeeping. Or for insurance. Or for some sick reason Claire couldn't comprehend. The disturbed earth. The covered grave. The shovel propped against a tree. Evidence documented by the killer himself. And then she found the bank documents, the audit files, the evidence of what Marissa had discovered. Evan had been embezzling money from client accounts for 3 years. Small amounts at first. Then larger transfers. By 2014, he'd stolen nearly $200,000. He'd created false accounts, manipulated records, covered his tracks carefully. Until Marissa started asking questions. Her audit report was incomplete, but damning. She'd identified discrepancies, traced them back to Evan's access codes, written a preliminary summary of her findings. She'd planned to present it to the regional manager Monday morning. If she had, Evan would have been fired, prosecuted, imprisoned. His perfect life would have ended. So he made sure she never made it to Monday. Claire called Detective Harris at 4 a.m., told him what she'd found. He arrived at her house within the hour, brought 2 other officers, seized the USB drive as evidence. He sat with Claire at her kitchen table while she cried, while she tried to understand how she'd missed the signs, how she'd shared a bed with a murderer, how she'd defended him when people whispered suspicions. Harris didn't judge her, didn't tell her she should have known. He'd seen enough in 19 years to understand that people hide who they really are, that even those closest to us can be strangers. That love makes us blind in ways we don't realize until it's too late. The confession was enough. Combined with the forensic evidence, the photos, the documents, it was more than enough. The district attorney filed formal charges: second-degree murder, evidence tampering, fraud, embezzlement, disposal of a body. Evan's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea, but Harris wanted this in front of a jury, wanted the truth on record, wanted justice for Marissa Cole. The interrogation took place in a small gray room with fluorescent lighting and no windows. Evan sat across from Detective Harris, his lawyer beside him, a camera recording every word. He'd lost weight. His skin was pale. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in years, like a man who'd been waiting for this conversation. Harris laid out the evidence methodically. The USB drive, the confession audio, the photos, the financial documents, the forensic evidence placing Evan at the burial site. Every piece fit together perfectly, constructing a narrative that left no room for doubt. Evan didn't deny any of it. What was the point? The truth was right there, documented in his own words. But when Harris asked about the details of that night, about exactly what happened between 9:47 p.m., when Marissa left the bank, and 2:43 a.m., when Evan's phone pinged a tower near his house, Evan told a story. And in that story was a detail that changed everything. He said he'd confronted Marissa in the parking lot, told her he knew about the audit, asked her to reconsider presenting her findings, offered her money to look the other way. She refused, told him she had an obligation to report what she'd found. They argued. She got in her car. He followed her in his. She pulled over on a rural road, tried to reason with him. He grabbed her arm. She pulled away. He pushed her. She fell backward, struck her head on the doorframe. She collapsed. Stopped moving. He panicked, checked for a pulse. Found nothing. Realized what he'd done. Realized his life was over unless he made it look like she'd never been there at all. He wrapped her in a tarp from his trunk, put her body in his car, drove to the forest where he'd scouted a location days earlier, dug the grave, buried her, covered the site with leaves and branches, drove home, took a shower, went to bed beside his wife. Woke up the next morning and pretended nothing had happened. Detective Harris listened to all of it, made notes, asked clarifying questions. Then he pulled out a photograph, an old photograph from the original investigation, a detail he'd noticed years ago but couldn't explain. He slid it across the table. The photo showed the burial site as it looked when they'd excavated it. And in the corner of the image, preserved in the dried mud, was something that hadn't been there in any of Evan's photos. A second set of footprints, boot prints, size 11. Evan wore size 9. Harris leaned forward. You said you buried her alone, but someone else was there. Someone helped you move the body. Someone took photos that you didn't take. Someone who's been sending you messages for 4 years. So I'll ask you one more time. Who else was there that night? Evan's face went white. His lawyer started to object, but Evan held up a hand. He stared at the photograph like he was seeing a ghost. His voice came out as a whisper. I buried her alone. I swear. There was nobody else. Harris tapped the footprints. Then who did these belong to? Evan had no answer, because he genuinely didn't know. For 4 years, he'd assumed the envelopes were coming from someone who'd seen something, someone who'd stumbled across evidence, someone who was blackmailing him. But he'd never considered the possibility that someone had been there, watching, waiting, documenting everything. The investigation shifted. Harris pulled traffic camera footage from roads near the forest, found a vehicle that appeared on multiple cameras during the time frame of the burial. A black Ford pickup, registered to Daniel Cole, Marissa's older brother. They brought Daniel in for questioning. He didn't deny anything, didn't lawyer up, just sat down and told them everything with an eerie calm that suggested he'd been waiting to tell this story for years. He said he'd followed Marissa that night, not because he suspected anything, just because he was overprotective, always had been. Didn't trust that her mentor's intentions were purely professional. He'd seen the way Evan looked at her, seen the late-night meetings, suspected something inappropriate was happening. He'd watched from a distance as Evan confronted her in the parking lot, watched them argue, watched her drive away with Evan following. He'd followed too, keeping back, trying to decide if he should intervene. Then he'd seen them pull over, seen the confrontation, seen Marissa fall, seen Evan check her pulse and realize she was dead. Daniel had pulled over too, watched from the tree line, watched Evan wrap his sister's body, watched him load her into his car. And then he'd made a decision. He could call the police, have Evan arrested, see justice served immediately. Or he could follow him, document everything, and make him suffer the way Marissa had suffered. Make him live in fear. Make him pay in ways that prison never could. So he'd followed Evan to the forest, watched him dig the grave, took photos with a telephoto lens, documented every moment. And when Evan left, Daniel had walked to the grave, stood over it, and made a promise to his sister. He would get justice, but not the quick kind, the slow kind, the kind that eats you alive from the inside. He'd sent the envelopes, made the calls, left the USB symbol scratched on Evan's office door. He'd used the evidence to blackmail Evan financially, demanded monthly payments that he claimed were to support their mother, but were really just another form of torture. He'd kept Evan in a state of constant terror for 4 years, watching him unravel, watching him destroy himself. And then, when he felt Evan had suffered enough, he'd sent the GPS coordinates to Detective Harris, set in motion the chain of events that led to this moment, orchestrated the entire collapse from beginning to end. Harris asked why he'd waited so long. Why not come forward immediately? Daniel's answer was simple. Because arrest would have been too easy. I wanted him to know what it felt like to be hunted, to never feel safe, to look over your shoulder every moment of every day and wonder when the truth would finally catch you. The district attorney charged Daniel with extortion, obstruction of justice, and tampering with evidence. His lawyer argued diminished capacity due to grief, argued that he'd been trying to gather evidence to ensure a conviction, argued that his actions came from a place of love for his sister. The jury didn't care. He was sentenced to 5 years. Evan Harrow went to trial in the fall of 2019. The prosecution presented the USB drive, the confession recordings, the photos, the financial documents, the forensic evidence. The defense tried to argue that Marissa's death was an accident, that Evan had panicked, that he wasn't a cold-blooded killer, but a desperate man who made a terrible choice. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, found him guilty of second-degree murder, evidence tampering, fraud, and embezzlement. The judge sentenced him to 35 years to life. He'll be 77 years old before he's eligible for parole. He'll likely die in prison. Claire divorced him before the trial ended, moved to another state with the kids, changed their last name, tried to build a life far away from Bristol County and the ruins of everything she'd believed in. She sold the house on Maple Street. A new family lives there now. They have no idea what happened in those rooms. Maybe it's better that way. Marissa's mother attended every day of the trial, sat in the front row, stared at Evan with a look that wasn't quite hatred, wasn't quite grief, but something heavier. The look of a woman who'd lost her daughter twice. Once when she disappeared, once when she learned the truth about how she died. Daniel served 3 years before being released on parole. He moved back to Bristol County, lives in a small apartment near the cemetery where Marissa is buried. He visits her grave every Sunday. Some people in town consider him a vigilante. Others call him a criminal who obstructed justice. He doesn't care what they think. He knows what he did and why he did it. Detective Harris retired in 2021. Marissa's case was the last major investigation of his career. He keeps her photo on his desk at home, not as a reminder of success, but as a reminder of how long it took, How many years she spent in the ground before anyone found her. How many times he almost gave up. He thinks about the USB drive sometimes, about how a tiny piece of technology, no bigger than a thumb, contained the complete destruction of a man's life. Evidence he'd created himself, documented himself, preserved himself, as if some part of him wanted to be caught, wanted the torture to end. That's the thing about guilt. It doesn't just weigh on you. It convinces you to build your own cage, to document your own crimes, to create the evidence that will destroy you. Because living with a secret like that isn't living at all. It's slowly dying while pretending to be alive. Evan Harrow buried Marissa Cole in the woods at 2:43 a.m. on March 16, 2014. But he started dying that same night. Every envelope, every phone call, every sleepless night, every moment of paranoia. It was all part of the same grave. He just didn't realize he was digging it for himself. 10 years. That's how long the USB drive waited in Claire's jewelry box, hidden behind pearls and memories, containing a truth that would shatter everything. 10 years of birthdays and holidays and ordinary mornings. 10 years of lying beside a murderer. 10 years of silence. The truth didn't claw its way out of the ground. It didn't announce itself with sirens and flashing lights. It waited patiently in the dark, in a tiny piece of plastic and circuitry, for the exact right moment to rise. For the moment when someone would finally look in the one place they'd never thought to look. Some secrets don't stay buried. They simply wait. Wait for the night when curiosity becomes stronger than fear. Wait for the moment when the person who's been searching finally finds what they didn't want to find. Wait for the jewelry box to be opened one more time. Marissa Cole was 21 years old when she died. She wanted to make her mother proud, wanted to prove she could succeed, wanted to do the right thing, even when the right thing put her in danger. She discovered the truth about Evan Harrow's fraud, and that truth cost her everything. But in the end, the truth cost him more. Cost him his freedom, his family, his reputation, his entire constructed life, and the perfect image he'd maintained for 42 years collapsed in a courtroom over 6 days of testimony. Everything he'd tried to protect by burying her became the exact things he lost. There's a moral here. Maybe it's about guilt. Maybe it's about justice. Maybe it's about how secrets have a way of finding light no matter how deep you bury them. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe it's just about the fact that when you kill someone, you don't just take their life. You start killing yourself. Slowly, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but the waiting. We want to know what you think. If you'd found that USB drive, would you have gone to the police immediately? Or would you have wanted answers first, wanted to understand what it meant before destroying everything you thought you knew? And do you think Daniel was right to make Evan suffer before turning him in? Or should justice have been immediate? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Tell us how you would have handled it. Tell us if you think guilt is enough punishment, or if prison is the only justice that matters. Tell us where you're watching from, and whether stories like this happen in your town. Because they happen everywhere. They just don't always end with someone finding the USB drive. Some truths don't stay buried. They wait for the right night to rise. And when they do, they bring everything with them. Every lie. Every moment of fear. Every desperate attempt to pretend the past doesn't exist. The truth rises, and it takes no prisoners. This was the story of Evan Harrow, the man who thought he could bury the truth forever, The man who documented his own destruction. The man who learned that some things can't be hidden. Not in the ground. Not in a jewelry box. Not anywhere. And this was the story of Marissa Cole, the young woman who did the right thing, who asked the dangerous questions, who deserved so much more than a shallow grave in the woods. Her name is not forgotten. Her story is not over. Because as long as someone remembers, as long as someone tells the truth, she's still here. Some truths don't stay buried. They simply wait. For you. For me. For the moment when someone finally looks.